Hi everyone and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles podcast, a podcast for keyboard players of the gigging variety. I'm your host David Holloway and I'm pumped as always to be here with you. Unfortunately I'm flying solo today. Paul is otherwise engaged. Miss you Paul as always. I'm really pleased this episode to be introducing Mr. Carey Frank. So Carey, at the princely age of 31, has already had an amazing career of well over a decade. He's played with Tedeschi Trucks and Michael Bublé. He's done some wonderful jazz work, rock work, you name it, he's done it. He also happens to have a faculty teaching position in music. And so we took the opportunity to catch up with Carey and talk about his career in music, all of the gigs he's played, and he has some wonderful anecdotes about his playing career to date and also some brilliant train wreck stories. It's a triple whammy of train wreck stories that are all brilliant. So, yeah, I think you'll enjoy this episode a lot, and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Carey, brilliant to have you on. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I thought we'd start with what is a common question for us, but I have listened to a couple of other interviews you've done, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you started piano lessons at age 3. So my question probably is, were you doomed for a life of a musician from that age because you started so early? And what do you actually recall from those earliest times?
Good question. I don't. I guess I do remember some of them. It was like a mommy and me class. I don't know if they have them at home where you are, but from what I remember, I was always the one who, I think after every lesson, however often it was, once a week or once every other week, whoever logged the most practice minutes or hours got to choose a toy out of the toy chest. And I remember I was always the one who got to choose the toy. And I don't remember practicing. I don't remember not playing music. And I guess doomed is kind of the right word.
That's brilliant. So, I mean, it just shows you inculcating a practice ethic at a young age helps. And so, and you obviously went through, I assume, elementary school and high school doing music. What was sort of your formative experiences that really made you think, yeah, I'd like to keep doing this?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to go to a pretty small private middle and high school. I'm from South Florida. Fort Lauderdale, which is just north of Miami. And it was a very small Jewish private school, and our music teacher was really a gigging musician, wedding singer, wedding musician. I'm still very close with him. I actually was just talking to him yesterday. And so our school band was really like a jazz rock band, jazz band with a drummer. I played keyboards. There was a singer, saxophone player, guitar player. And he taught us Beatles songs, jazz songs, current and old pop songs. I remember learning Hotel California and then having to revisit it later on. Like I already knew it when the rest of the band didn't. And he even taught, like we booked some gigs as high school band. And so he taught us, like, if the gig starts at 6, you show up at 5, be ready to play at 5:45, dress like this, stuff like that. He was a really great teacher, and I spent all my free time and all my lunch periods with him, and then jumping ahead to talk about something I'm sure we'll talk about later on, but there was no bass player in the band. And so I played a lot of left-hand bass on the keyboard, not thinking about an organ, just thinking like, well, there was bass missing, and I just kind of, my ear taught me to do that. He taught me what an organ is, specifically a Hammond B3 organ, and then I eventually found one at a local music store. Yeah, and the rest is history. But we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm going to take a bit of a right turn there. So you mentioned there's this great teacher you've kept in touch to this day, and I'm a bit the same, not in music, but in English. I've kept in touch with a teacher to this day. So that's obviously an extremely influential thing. And do you think, because I know you do teach yourself, do you think that was a big influence on your dual role as both a very busy player but also a teacher?
Yeah, I love teaching, and it's really fun with great students. And I think I was a great student because I was curious, and well, I've had really great teachers. Zohar was one of my first great ones. Even before that, the Mommy and Me teacher, her name was Miss Jane, and I honestly don't remember a lot about her, but I do remember obviously something stuck. After Zohar, my college piano teacher, I went to University of Central Florida, which is in Orlando, Florida. His name was Per Danielson, and again, he is one of my closest friends. He was at my wedding last year, and he's just a very, very close friend. And then I did my master's at University of Southern California here in LA. I'm still very close friends with some of my teachers from there, like drummer Ron Sarfati and Bob Mincer, saxophone player, and a lot of others that I've just really been lucky to have been taught from. And yeah, I'm sure it really helped my, how I teach.
So while we're still on the teaching stream, so what do you teach at the moment? And then I want to ask you a question about a master's, but let's just talk about what you teach at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I teach. I'm currently on faculty at Los Angeles College of Music, which is here in Pasadena, California. It is, I think, a sister school to MI, Musicians Institute, which is, I think, a little more well-known worldwide. But there's a lot of great students and faculty over there. Another keyboard player named Mitch Foreman is on faculty with me, and a bunch of other great ones. And it's a great school. But I teach a little over there. I do a lot of private lessons and a lot of clinics, and I really love doing that. Obviously it's more fun to teach more advanced students. And yeah, and then with COVID, started all of the virtual lessons, like Zoom lessons and all that stuff. So I really worked on my Zoom, and even if I'm on tour, I have a really good portable Zoom setup.
No, great. And so just while your master's degree, so my understanding is you did your Keep Smiling album. I assume that was your thesis or your major project, whatever it is called, at your school for your master's. What was the process like for you, sort of juggling the creativity of creating an album and the course requirements or the thesis requirements for it?
Yeah, USC is a great school, and I honestly don't know if it's the same for undergrad, but for master's program, you have to do 2 recitals, and your second recital can be an album, which I think is amazing. I remember I made my first website because it was part of the class project in my music tech class when I was an undergrad. And anyway, so yeah, I feel like maybe I wasn't totally ready to make an album, but I thought it was a good kick in the butt to do it. So yeah, I made a piano trio album and featured Bob Mincer on 2 of the tracks. And
did you find the requirements for the masters, and it sounds like the requirements were recital, so therefore you were free to just create in your own way, not needing a lot of boundaries around that, so you're just able to create whatever you liked?
Yeah, I mean, it did have to get approved, even after you release the album. I figured if I hire one of the faculty members, let alone the director of the jazz studies, and they don't approve it, what is that? Is that I don't know if that's what I'm trying to say. So, and then also I was pretty proud of it, and I would be surprised if they didn't approve it. And yeah, it was also, again, it was just great to make that.
Yeah, great. And we'll definitely be linking to that in the show notes. So you mentioned just before about learning the bass and the left hand. So what was the beginning of your relationship with the organ? Because obviously a lot of your work is amazing organ work with your own trio and a lot of other bands you play with. So tell us how that relationship started.
Yeah, like I said, in high school, I was really lucky to just fall into that. My dad's a chiropractor in South Florida, and I remember at one point told me he's got this new patient. Maybe I've heard of him. His name is Lonnie Smith. And so I eventually met Lonnie. We became very, very close friends. He was at my parents' Thanksgiving dinner a few years in a row. And, sadly he passed away not too long ago. But we're still very close friends with his manager, Holly. And he really, he didn't teach me organ, but he just kind of helped me, this does that, and you take it from here. And it was almost like just being around him. It was like Bluetooth, like you got to be near him, and then it sinks in. And then in college, when I was in Florida, I really didn't do a lot of organ. I did some organ playing, specifically like left-hand bass, organ sound on a keyboard. I worked at Disney World and a little at Cirque du Soleil and Blue Man Group and a lot of Orlando type music gigs that comes with living in that city. And then when I moved to LA, I did my master's at USC, and then either right when I finished USC or towards the end, I knew how to move an organ, and I've always wanted one, and I figured I'm going to be here for a long time. So I bought a B3 and a minivan from someone for a pretty good deal. The minivan only lasted a few months, but the organ is still one of my favorites. I eventually bought 3 more B3s and Leslies that are kind of scattered throughout LA. But it was almost like, the day after I bought that B3, I've pretty much been working every day since.
Absolutely. And do you think buying a B3 of all the different types of keyboards is a rebellion against your father as a chiropractor? Because I can't think of a more chiropractor-unfriendly instrument.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think, it's harder than it looks to move the organ. It's really not that bad. The hardest part is moving it on carpet or grass, obviously. And the other hardest part is the fact that it kind of has to be 3 or 4 trips from the car to the venue or stage. So if it's a pretty long walk, usually drummers have a cart. We can't really put it on a cart. It's got to be 3 or 4 trips no matter what. So that's really the hardest part. But that's funny.
That's okay. And you mentioned Blue Man Group, Cirque du Soleil, and so on. Just a brief question on that they're obviously very tightly scheduled, choreographed, sequence shows. What did you learn from sort of playing a role in those shows?
Yeah, I was a sub in those, but I was primarily a keyboard player in a show in Walt Disney World. Within Walt Disney World in Orlando are 4 parks. One of them is called Epcot. And within Epcot, there are all these different countries. One of them is Morocco. And I was in a band called Moroccan, which was a Middle Eastern fusion band. And yeah, I think it was 6 20-minute shows a day. It was always like the opener song, second song featured a belly dancer, third song was like the big finish, and maybe a 4th song. And it was really fun and something I never did before, learning I was one of the many keyboard subs, but I was fortunate to be there pretty often. And, you show up and here's the keyboard. It's already, the sounds are there. You just press the patch number for what song we're playing. And 2 keyboards split into sometimes like 3 sounds. Here's the sitar sound, here's the string sound, here's a horn sound, here's a piano sound, here's this and that. And every song is different. So you kind of have to learn where it was. And it was my first time really learning parts, and I learned so much from that gig, and it was a great learning experience. On top of it, I love Disney, and I love being able to. I worked in Disney World and got to walk through the park every day to get to work. It was a really great gig.
No, that's excellent. And so, did you fall into that straight out of high school?
Kind of. So my teacher, Per Danielson, who's one of my great teachers and one of my close friends. He was a major part of the Disney music scene in Orlando. At one point, I don't know what year this is, maybe the 80s or 90s, Disney brought out a ton of musicians from all over the country, or really all over the world, especially in Epcot with the different countries section where they tried to get authentic musicians, and not just music, all, every service. But so Pear was a major part of the music scene in Disney. I think the band reached out to him if he wanted to be one of the keyboard players. He recommended me and another student, and we really didn't even audition. He just kind of recommended us, and next thing I knew, I was at orientation at Disney World. And then I remember hearing stories from other guys like, yeah, my audition, I was part of 50 other guitar players. I was one of 30 violinists who, I just kind of showed up.
That's excellent. And so was that the start of you really, if not making a full-time career out of it at that stage, at least going, this is what I'm doing now?
Kind of. That definitely helped my resume at that point. I mean, when I was in high school, I was already kind of gigging. I don't really remember going to high school parties or events, right? I was just always gigging. Something I skipped over, both of my grandparents were musicians. My grandfather on my dad's side was a Klezmer musician, which is like a Jewish wedding band, bar mitzvah musician, originally from New York, and then moved to South Florida. And when I was in high school, he really started hiring me as his piano player, and that was another great teacher. He was another great teacher, Grandpa Harry. He's who I dedicated my first album to, Keep Smiling, because he'd always say, keep smiling. And then my other grandfather, my mom's stepdad, he was a crooner, jazz singer. His name was Don Cornell, and he was famous, I think, in like the 1930s. He is a star on the Walk of Fame, which is pretty cool. And I didn't know him as well as Grandpa Harry, but I was already kind of gigging, and I was busy being a professional musician.
Yeah, great. And so how did you transition from those sub gigs to what was your first, fairly regular, you were the go-to guy sort of gig?
It's kind of like now I've always been, and I've always loved being a sideman. I've never really had that big major gig. I've been a part of a million different gigs, subbing, or if I was the full-time guy, it was never like we're out for the whole year. You had to do a million other things. Like most musicians nowadays, even with those big gigs, you still have to come home and do other stuff.
That's right.
I do remember Pear said, we've joked about this a lot, that he'd get called for a gig, like a jazz gig on a Friday night or something, and they said, hey, can you play at this event, blah, blah, blah. And Pear said, no, I'm not available. Did you ask Carey? And they said, yeah, we already talked to him. He can't do it. Can you do it? And so, yeah, I've always luckily been busy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'd be interested in your thoughts, but I would see that as the best of both worlds, that you're getting to play some serious gigs, but you're not nailed down for a year and you get a lot more variety.
Yeah. I think the grass is greener. I would love some kind of job like that at some point, but I think what I'm doing right now is really fun. I'm constantly learning. For as long as I can remember, I've always been learning new music for something, and then way before that's even done, I'm already kind of learning the next thing, and yeah.
And so in this first, I mean, how many years has it been, Carey, since you've been working professionally? Be 15? 20?
I think so. I'm 31 now. So I started when I was
15.
Yeah, when I was in high school. It's been fun.
And so how do you feel, now at age 31, how do you feel your playing's evolved over that time? There's no doubt it will have evolved, but what do you think are the key things that you've learnt about your own playing over that time?
I feel like it's always, maturing, hopefully, and growing with the different musicians I work with, the different music that I listen to. It really does seem like I learn a lot from almost every gig. I'm working on a new project with this organ trio with a drummer named Jimmy Branley, who's one of the most amazing Cuban drummers. He lives here in LA, and him and a great guitarist named Mitchell Long, who's an amazing guitar player. He really specialized in that Brazilian jazz guitar playing, but just learning all these new rhythms that I've never really, dived that deep into learning stuff from them. We recorded some music a few weeks ago, so we were doing some mixing today as a band, and just listening back to things that I didn't think I would. I don't think I would have caught if I didn't play with someone like Jimmy. And that's just like one, just one session. Sometimes I'm running to a few different sessions each day, so it's just fun to. Yeah, it's fun to learn new stuff.
And so you've raised a really great point there, because what we find in a lot of our interviews is obviously the session scene is less than what it was 20 years ago, and 40 years ago it's probably a tenth of what it was. But it sounds like there are still plenty of session gigs out there, depending on how versatile you are. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I think playing organ helps a lot. I was just listening to your interview with Mitch Town, who's become a friend through the online social media organ player thing, and I think being an organ player just kind of helps you stick up through all the other guys, and then actually, speaking of Mitch, the guitar player that is on his new album, Andrew Sinowick, has become a very close friend while living in LA. I just recorded on Andrew did a solo album, I think we recorded over the summer, and he has a song on there. It's called something. The name has something to do with how, 20 years ago, those guys that were the top session guys, they were saying, yeah, today's cool, but 20 years ago, that's where we should have been. Those session guys were, and then 20 years ago, those guys were saying, yeah, but 20 years ago, this is where it should have been. So I think, you can look at it that way, but I think, there's work out there. Hopefully that will stay through current economy, and things are getting way more expensive and all that stuff. That's kind of scary to think about, but there's still, luckily I'm still busy, and people are still hiring me. So
yeah, which
keep
is
hiring
great.
me.
And it definitely helps that you're one of the centers of music in the US. So that's great. Yeah. That's excellent. So you've mentioned you've worked with a lot of artists. I thought, if you're happy to, Carey, I might rattle off a couple of artists that you've worked with and ask for your thoughts. And then I'd love you to provide, say, two other artists that have been highlights for you.
Sure.
Now, regular listeners of the podcast will know I'm an absolute Springsteen tragic. So tell us about what your short involvement was with Bruce and the team.
Yeah, that was a very short. It was one show. He sat in with a band that I toured with for about 4 or 5 years called Social Distortion, Social D, for those who, most people know them as Social D. That was a really fun show. It was on I can't remember how long that tour. Actually, that might have been before I was officially in the band. They asked me to play keyboards. Social D originally asked me to play keyboards with them. I was a little busy with other stuff, so I turned it down and recommended another friend, and then I eventually subbed for that friend a few times. One of them was in Asbury Park, and they, I think on the bus into the venue, Mike, the lead singer, Mike Ness, was talking about, yeah, Bruce might come and sit in, and I'm thinking, who's Bruce? And then eventually it hit me, Bruce Springsteen, and then I immediately texted my mom when I found out, because she is also a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and he hung out after during sound check. He hung out after. He was the coolest, like, for one of the most famous people in the world. He was so cool and down to earth. And I just remember we did the show. We have in-ear monitors, and so he's like standing literally right in front of me, and like that famous, I can't remember the album, where you see his back and his jean.
Yeah, Born in the USA. Yep.
Born in the USA. And so it's like I saw that. I was looking at that, and then I could hear his voice in my in-ears. Like it was a pretty surreal moment. Every once in a while, I still look back at those photos. I have like a Dropbox folder I made of the photos. The photographer from that night was able to send me some photos, and that was a highlight.
That's great. No, that is brilliant. And then the other one from one extreme or end of the world to the other, Vanessa Amorosi. So obviously Vanessa is an Australian and we love Vanessa and she's got an amazing voice. And I've seen some great videos of you playing with her. Tell us about how that came about.
Yeah, I had a feeling we were going to bring up Vanessa. She, it's funny. We've only done one show together, but just from texting and messaging and stuff. And then also we had like maybe 3 or 4 rehearsals leading up to that show. Feels like we've been friends for a while. And then at one point we talked about doing many other shows. We had a few penciled in, and then she had to go back to Australia. I think she just got back to LA today. But she's like one of the best singers I've ever shared the stage with. She's so incredible, and it was fun to learn her music. And she came over to my apartment a few times, and I can't remember if it was sort of a last minute, learn a lot of music and let's get together, see if it works. She said she had some trouble grooving with certain piano players, but seemed like she really enjoyed working with me, and I hope to work more with her. Same with another great Australian guitar player named Orianthi. She was on stage with us. So it was cool I've known of her for a while. It was cool to finally meet her and share the stage with her.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I hope you do get to work with Vanessa again. Although Vanessa has had some huge success in Australia, I'd still argue that she's grossly underrated, even in Australia, let alone internationally. Her voice is amazing. Yeah. And so the third one I was going to ask you about, Carey, was Lonnie Smith, but you've covered that link. So I'm assuming you never had the pleasure of actually playing with Lonnie?
No.
No.
I don't think we've like shared the same. I've jammed many times with him in his house in Florida. He has 2 B3s in his living room, and my dad took a really cool photo of the 2 of us sitting next to each other. I think it was the last time I was at his house. But no, we never got to share the stage.
No, that's fine. And so some artists that have stood out for you, Carey, that you've really enjoyed working with?
Well, one of the first big tours I've done was with a band called Tedeschi Trucks, with Derek Trucks and Susan. And that was pretty amazing experience. That was another kind of last minute. Kofi, who was Derek's keyboard player for, I think since Derek was, in his teens, from the Derek Trucks Band. He, I didn't remember what the issue was, but he had some heart issue and needed to take time off of their big summer tour in 2017. So I had like a week to learn all their music. Derek texted or emailed me like, here's the first 20 I really want you to focus on. When you get through that, here's the next 20. After that, here's the next 20. And I didn't sleep or eat for about 4 days. Flew to their house to do like a 2-day rehearsal in Jacksonville. And then their first day of tour was my birthday in 2017. And that was amazing, getting to just meet all those guys. And it was about like a month and a half tour, 2 sold out shows in Red Rocks. And then I did a few other tours after that, but it ended with Kofi was able to come back, and I was able to kind of share a short run at the Beacon Theater in New York with him. We kind of traded off.
Wow.
And those were pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's excellent. And so with the week that you didn't sleep or eat, I mean, obviously you have the chops to be able to deal with that, and I assume, again, your organ skills came in handy knowing their music. But what were the key challenges? Was it purely just the volume of stuff to learn?
It was stuff to learn, even though the music isn't crazy challenging, especially coming from, I wasn't that long out of jazz college. But it was just, it was a lot of music. Some songs were, the second verse, there's this 1-2-4 measure, stuff like that. It was a lot of the little things. And my organ playing definitely helped me get, I think, recognized to be able to sub for Kofi. There are other keyboard parts in it, a lot of clav, and some songs with Wurlitzer piano stuff, but it is primarily organ, and I think that helped a lot.
No, that's excellent. And was there another artist that stood out for you that I haven't asked you about?
Luckily, I've been been able to play with a lot of different amazing musicians, so I'm trying to narrow it down. One was actually a pretty recent show. I got to play with an amazing piano player named Mike Garson. Have you heard of that name
Oh,
before?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Bowie.
exactly. So I played with a great drummer maybe 7 months ago named Denny Sywell, who was in the Wings. And we played a show at the Baked Potato, and I've known of Mike obviously for a while, and all of a sudden, like, he's sitting right next to me, and Denny introduces him to me and says they're old friends, and he actually sat in that night with his grandson, who named Max, who's an amazing drummer. He's only 17, and he's one of Denny's students. And so from that night, I kind of met and befriended Mike, and we became pretty close friends in the last few months. We've gone out to lunch, and so then fast forward, he's been doing these really cool intimate shows at a pretty swanky hotel in Hollywood where the House of Blues used to be, and he features a few amazing singers. Sometimes it's duo, just him and a singer. Sometimes it's with a full band. Singers like Beck, Luke Spiller from the band The Struts.
The Struts, yeah.
And anyway, so we just did. So he had an idea to do a 2-night show. It was piano, drums, organ, and Luke. So we did 2 nights of that, and playing mostly Bowie music, and a few other songs, but some of Luke's original songs. And it was that was a pretty incredible experience. And
how was your learning for that, Carey? As far as obviously Bowie's catalogue is incredibly diverse, did you find that interesting to learn for those sets?
It was really fun. I'm a huge David Bowie fan, but yeah, we played some songs that I never heard of. It was obviously pretty incredible to hear Mike play, what's that song, Aladdin Sane, or the intro to Changes, and or Life on Mars. I mean, everything. It was just incredible to, again, like the Bruce Springsteen thing. He's like in my in-ears. Mike was right there, and to hear those songs, it was just incredible. And then again, Mike and I become pretty good friends. We're doing a similar show, but without Luke. It's just going to be piano, organ, and drums at this really beautiful jazz club in Paso Robles, which is like Central California. We're doing that. I think that's next month, and hopefully many more after that.
That's brilliant. And just for our listeners that are unaware of Luke Spiller and the Struts, Luke is a sort of person that does do lots of innovative and interesting projects outside of the Struts. And for example, I was introduced to Luke via his work with Mike Oldfield, which would have been one of the last artists I would have expected him to work with. So it just shows you the diversity of his approach as well.
Luke is one of the most incredible performers. Vocal, just how he is on stage. He's like a rock star, and also the nicest guy in the world. He's a really cool guy, and yeah, same thing. Hopefully, I can get to work with him a lot more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. And a question without notice, Carey. What's a question that you've never been asked in an interview that you wish someone would actually ask you?
I feel like I've been asked everything that
That's just a way of making, I guess, not leave the interviews feeling unsatisfied. Thinking, well, why wasn't I asked that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a question might be something like, "What's something that you want to do or you haven't done yet?" But even that, I wouldn't even know the answer, other than
we used to ask that. Yeah, you're right. It's a great question, and it's one that most people don't know the answer to. But I mean, what is on your bucket list? Though? I think it's worth asking. So, what's on your bucket list? You've got 30 to 40 years of a career left, Carey, so you've got plenty of time.
Hopefully, at least that much. I would love to do I hope I'm not saying this too fast. I would love to do a bigger, longer tour. I'm sure, again, grass is greener. So maybe, month 2 of a 4-month long or something big tour. I think I'm sure I'd be shooting myself in the foot. But I would love to do something like that where I can just focus on one thing without, playing a show and being really focused on this one music, but also knowing I'm doing another big show tomorrow night with totally different music and totally different genre, totally different keyboards. It would be nice to focus, give 100% energy into one thing. Even I've done a lot of recording sessions where, so that we can focus, like the artist will we'll book a session outside of LA and book a hotel room so that we have to be totally focused. We're not running to a gig, usually, especially in LA, because everyone's busy. It's been rare for me to book a session where at least one, if not everyone, is running to a gig later that night. And it is kind of a bummer as a band leader, knowing that everyone else is kind of focused on something else. Anyways, yeah, I think it would be kind of cool to maybe focus on one thing, or really a big goal would also be having one of those TV show gigs like a Jimmy Kimmel. The keyboard player Jeff Babko, who's someone I look up to, he's got that gig, and yeah, I think that would be great.
And I'd say he won't give it up either. We had the pleasure of speaking with Jeff, and great guy, and I think that would be a great gig.
Yeah, I've talked to Jeff a lot about that, and same thing. I mean, I think Grass is Greener. I mean, that's like one of the best gigs ever. It's like major touring money, but you're back home every night. But maybe it's not the most advanced music, but it's still a great gig and people are watching. And I just love a good show. I think it comes from playing with my grandfather, who was a great entertainer. He wasn't the greatest musician, but he was a great band leader and entertainer, and he just put on a great show. And I love putting on a great show, whether it's punk rock or Tedeschi Trucks Band or Michael Bublé or whatever it is. I love just putting on a good show.
And let's just briefly speak about Michael Bublé. So what was that, sort of a temporary gig, or he sat in on someone, or?
Yeah, I was it last?
If you tell me you sat in on Social Distortion, I'll fall off my chair.
No, that would be interesting. No, we not last December, the one before that, I was on the NBC Christmas special Michael did. So that was a pretty amazing one. We flew to New York, recorded it at the SNL, I think it's called Stage 8, 8H. That was an incredible experience. It was pretty COVID heavy, so I think it would have been more fun if there were not so strict protocols where, you had to wait in this room, the green light, we can go into this room. I think other circumstances, it would have been a little more fun, but it was still an amazing experience to be in New York during that time. And yeah, there was talk of maybe doing a tour after that, but it didn't work out. So hopefully I can work with them at some point too.
No, great. And just when you mentioned Tonight shows and being the ideal gig, I'd argue being in the band for SNL is even better than the Tonight shows, because it's one gig a week that you have a bit more time to put some focus into.
I know. The only downside, I guess, is not, is you have to live in New York, but which is a downside to some people. That, like, I don't like the cold, so I couldn't do it. But, some people love New York, just not for me.
Yeah, no, that's right. And now you mentioned different keyboards. What are your go-to keyboards, Carey? It obviously does vary by the gig, and you've mentioned your B3. So what are the other staples that, you couldn't live without for most of your gigs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bring a B3 and Leslie and pedals to almost every gig. It's in my van, and sometimes with or without that, I'll bring my Nord. Really, my go-to keyboard is my Nord Electro. I have a really cool little 53-key neon green Rhodes with a cool pedal board that I put together. That's kind of my go-to. If I am doing more synthy stuff, I don't have any hard synths, any Prophets or anything like that, but I do use Logic Mainstage. I did some work with Paris Jackson a few years ago, and so it was the first time in a while I had to dive deeper into Logic Mainstage, getting some keyboard sounds for that. But mostly my B3 and a Nord, and I've been actually running, like, sometimes depending on the genre, if I'm using mostly Rhodes sounds, maybe even clav sounds, I'll run the Nord through the B3. I install the 1/4 inch in, so it'll come out the Leslie. So that sounds really cool, like a Rhodes through the Leslie.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. No, great. And any particular plugins you like with Mainstage and Logic as far as keyboard plugins?
Not really. I just, if I am using I'm not really happy with the Mainstage piano sound, so I'm going to run that through Nord anyways. But all of their synth sounds, string sounds, I'm pretty happy with what's built into Mainstage, at least so far what I've needed.
The defaults are very strong. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like a big Katy Perry type of tour. Like one of my close buddies, Ty Bailey, who I know was on this podcast also, we've talked a lot about that. They ran a lot of Mainstage with like the Katy Perry show. They also had like 6 backup, MacBooks ready to go, knowing the first one will at some point die. And but yeah, I haven't had to deal with that yet.
No, that's right. And you also haven't had to deal with poop emojis thrown at you on stage from Katy. So there are some advantages to not doing the big tours.
That's right.
And so just going back to you as someone that's got more than 10 years under their belt now of experience, so there tips you'd pass on, and you obviously do this in your teaching gig, are there tips you would pass on to players just coming into the industry now, and particularly about what skills are going to need in, say, 10, 20, 30 years' time to still be able to potentially make an income in music?
Yeah. Say yes to every gig. Even if you don't know how to do it, say yes and figure it out later. I've done that a lot. Don't limit yourself to any specific genre. I mean, coming from, majoring in jazz piano and getting a master in jazz piano and then touring with a punk rock band. I mean, it's all the same notes and yeah, it's all good music. That's the main thing is saying yes to everything. And then not to, I guess, I don't know how to say it. I'm not trying to say like find a niche, but just, I didn't plan on being a B3 player, and I definitely didn't plan on it being a strategy to stand out. I just kind of lucked out that I love this instrument and I know how to play it pretty well, and I know how to move a real B3. That was another thing that really stood me out. There are a few B3 players in LA that bring a keyboard, but other than maybe 1 or 2, and even those guys don't bring it to every gig, I bring it to every $50 gig just because it's way more fun. I think it sounds way better. It looks way better. It's really not that hard to move it, unless it's totally impossible, like if there's a sharp turn or whatever. But doing that really helped me stand out. But it wasn't a strategy. It just happened. So I think, I don't know how to say it other than just, find your sound, find your thing.
Yeah, and be open. Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And you've mentioned obviously that you do lots of different gigs. So I'm assuming you'd have the odd train wreck story, because nothing's harder than learning new music for different gigs all the time. Have you had any disasters on stage?
Yeah, 3 short stories come to mind if you have time. One was a wedding gig. That's pretty funny. It was with this big band jazz singer in town. We booked a wedding gig, and it was in LA. And so he told me, by the way, just me being the piano player, I'm gonna have to learn these 2 songs to play with this Broadway singer who's a guest of the wedding, and she's gonna sit in. I'm not going to mention her name, but she is kind of a famous Broadway singer. And if you know that, I didn't know of her, but after researching her, realized she was pretty famous. Anyways, but, there's a limited amount of time. We didn't have time to get together for rehearsal, so we booked a rehearsal. She sent me the music to learn, and she told me, like, by the way, like, this music, it's kind of put together. My music director copy and pasted 2 different charts. It's a medley of 2 songs with 2 different keys. And I really, looking back to it, I should have typed up my own chart, but I just thought, whatever, it's a wedding gig. Who cares? So then we did a Zoom rehearsal, which is already kind of like we're shooting ourselves in the foot. her only day off was she was down at Disneyland with her family. Her husband and baby were sleeping in the hotel. So during our Zoom rehearsal, she sat in the hallway of the hotel. So there's people going by. We're trying to play together as best we could through Zoom with the delay. So whatever, it was like, I think I know it, whatever, we'll figure it out at the wedding tomorrow night. And then we do she comes on stage. There's a big band behind me. So there's like 10 musicians sitting behind me. There's about 150 people in the audience. And we play the song. She's also holding her baby while she's performing, which is kind of cute, but it's also distracting her. And I can already tell she's already nervous. She's getting distracted. And then she like skips a part of the song. Like she skips a part of the verse. And I'm trying to follow. And I think I'm like using my ear pretty good. But then, like I said, the medley of the two songs, the second song is in kind of a different key. She starts to get to that. Long story short, it folded pretty bad. We ended up we stopped. She made a joke about it. We tried to start again. We could not figure out the same place. We just kind of said, okay, thank you. And then she walked off the stage, and it was pretty, that was a pretty rough one. But that one stands. And then her and I eventually laughed about it at the end of the night. Two other really quick ones related to the B3 organ. One, we played one of my organ trios called Rump Roller Organ Trio, which is a really fun band. We actually have some new music coming out soon. But we played a wedding gig. This was a few years ago, and we didn't know this until we showed up, and now we've added this to our rider when we do gigs. But we showed up, and there was a generator powering everything, and a Hammond B3 cannot run on a generator. I learned this after this gig. So basically we plugged everything in, and the organ was like down a whole step, but also kind of wavy. So basically just the guitarist couldn't plug in or couldn't play along because it was too out of key, out of tune. So it was basically just me and the drummer just kind of jamming. And really no one noticed the difference. One guy walked up to us and said, man, you guys sound like the funkiest Dodgers game or something like that. It was
because the organ was sounding like a baseball organ.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, you guys sound like the funkiest Dodgers game or something like that. It was really funny.
Oh, that's funny.
And the last thing, which has to do with Ty again. So long story short, Ty's a few years older than me, or however many years older than me, and he moved to town from Seattle a few years before I did, and he was gigging. He was like, for a while, he was the B3 player before me, and then I slowly started to sub for him, and then really shortly after that, he got the gig with Katy Perry, and it was like perfect timing for both of us. He got to go out with that, and I got to sub for all of his in-town gigs, and that really jump-started, on top of already being like one of the B3 players, one of the only B3 players in town along with Ty. It's like now I got all his gigs too. It really helped both of us. And on top of that, I didn't have my own organ yet. He left his B3 in a van in a parking lot at a club in Hollywood. I can't remember if he mentioned it on this podcast, called Sassafras Saloon. He played there every Monday night with Rump Roller, which eventually kind of turned into my gig. So his B3 was in his van in this parking lot, and I could just go and grab it whenever I wanted. So I had a pretty big gig in downtown LA, which is about 20 to 30 minutes from Hollywood. And it was a huge event. And so I went to get his van. Wait, I'm jumping things around. I just got my organ. This is exactly a week after I bought my first B3 and my minivan. So I'm going to that gig, but knowing that Ty's organ is in this parking lot. I went to the gig in downtown. I set everything up, plugged it in, and right away I could hear something is weird. You just know when you turn on like an old car or something, that first ignition, something is off. So I turn on, not even a full minute later, black smoke is shooting out of the B3. So I quickly turned it off. I called my organ technician, Bill Axman. He said, yeah, don't do anything else. Leave it turned off. You're going to have to bring it to me. And so I thought, this is a really big gig. I need this. I need an organ. So I knew, okay, Ty's organ is at this club in Hollywood, and I've got the keys. Let me drive over there. I've got time. So I drive over there. I thought, okay, I'm just going to grab his van and drive it back because I don't have time to swap. So I jump in his car, and of course his battery is dead. So now I have to unload his organ and everything, put it into my car, and move my Leslie, put it into his car, run back to the gig. Luckily, I plugged it all in. Everything worked good for the gig, and then I dealt with everything later on. Basically, what I learned, like I said, it was exactly a week after I bought my B3. My favorite B3, which is this one, I bought it from a guy selling stuff from a warehouse for like TV films and movie films, and I guess this B3 was used as a prop for like 30 years. It was never plugged in, but for some reason I plugged it in and it just sounded perfect, and I fell in love with this organ. Usually something like this not being used for that long is like a red flag, but something about it kind of called to me, and like I said, literally the day after I bought it, I used it every day since. So about a week after using it, for not using it for 30 years and then using it every day since, all the dirt and dust got built up in the preamp. Eventually, all that caught on fire, and that's what happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
And to me, that sounds like nearly the perfect keyboard player's nightmare when you have nightmares at night. The only thing is less time to get back to the gig and getting red lights the whole way back. It's the perfect, keyboard player's nightmare.
Yeah, that was pretty stressful. Just have backup plans. That's what you got to do if you're going to use this vintage gear.
But it also shows you the importance of network. So, I mean, knowing that there was that Ty had another keyboard nearby. And I mean, it's interesting to note, Ty will probably never work in LA again because he accused Sting of being a psychopath on our podcast. And I think that killed his career outright. So I think you're set for gigs.
Well, he'll be busy in Nashville. He's fine.
Yeah, that's right. So let's talk about tagging keyboard players. You mentioned some great players already, but is there someone that you would love to see interviewed about their career that you've always admired or been inspired by?
Yeah. You said Jeff Babko. He's been on here, right? I feel like he has.
Yes.
Yeah. That might have been maybe how I first heard of you guys, was searching for interviews with Jeff. It would be cool to hear more from Mike Garson.
Absolutely. But that's a bucket list one for us.
Yeah. Mike, I don't know if you guys have interviewed Rachel Eckroth. Have you interviewed her? Do you know?
No, I haven't. No. Tell us about Rachel.
Rachel's an incredible keyboard player and singer and composer. Her husband, Tim Lefebvre, is a great bass player, and he was with Tedeschi Trucks, and that was kind of the connection, how I got into that world. But she's currently touring with St. Vincent, plus has her own stuff. Oh, wow. She's just a great musician. They're living in Las Vegas right now, I think. Her and right. Jacob Mann would be great too. I don't know if you've heard of Jacob Mann.
No.
I don't know if you've seen these videos called 1 minute jazz lessons on YouTube. They're pretty funny. He's got a great sense of humor. I went to USC with Jacob, and he's just got an amazing sense of humor and an amazing big band arranger and keyboard player. He's been playing with like Lewis Cole and a lot of those musicians, and Rufus Wainwright. He plays with him. He might even be music directing that band. I feel like I've heard that. But anyways, Jacob Mann and Rachel Eckroth would be great.
Great picks. Yeah, and Mike. I mean, I said Mike is on our bucket list. I know they're three great picks. Thanks, Kerry. And then the dreaded Desert Island Disc question, 5 albums that really you could, if not couldn't live without, just are your top 5.
Okay, I've got 8, even though
that's okay. 8... So just for we've recently compiled them all, and the numbers guests provide vary between 4 and 10. So
okay, cool.
8's probably okay.
And even I know that I'm even missing a lot, but these are just the first ones scrolling through my old iTunes. That even though I don't really listen to that anymore, I use streaming like Spotify. But I love Paul Simon's Graceland. That's like one of my go-to. I'll listen to that album on repeat. Plus everything else from Paul Simon. But Graceland was really amazing for me. Chick Corea's, again, almost anything from Chick Corea, but Tap Step, as well as Paint the World, which I think Paint the World was one of his later Electric Band albums, but for me, what's pretty amazing, like Gary Novak and Jimmy Earl were on those albums, so I've become friends with those guys living in LA. But Tap Step and Paint the World were some of the first Chicory albums I checked out. Dave Brubeck's Time Out, the one with Blue Ronda La Turk and Take 5, those were just amazing albums. I remember listening to those albums for the first time and like hearing music that wasn't in 4/4 blew my mind. Herbie Hancock's Trio with Ron Carter and Tony Williams. I think the album's called Herbie Hancock Trio. That's an amazing trio album. John Scofield, again, anything by Scofield, but his album That's What I Say, which is the tribute to Ray Charles. The opening track Busted with Larry Goldings, it's just an amazing, that's one of Larry's best organ solos ever.
Yeah.
3 more come to mind. Michael Brecker's Time Is of the Essence, that's another Larry Goldings that might have been Brecker's only organ trio album. I could be totally wrong, but that's the one that I know of. Allan Holdsworth, Blues for Tony, which features Alan Pasqua, and he was using a Nord, and because I remember on the album, like it was like a 2-disc album, and I remember reading like Alan wanted to personally thank, or Alan Pasqua wants to personally thank Nord for making the best keyboard ever, and I think I bought my first Nord like the next day or something like that. Like his sounds were incredible. And then the last ones are like anything by Keith Jarrett, like any of his trio albums.
Yeah.
Belonging, the one with Long As You Know You're Living, or My Song or the Colm Concert. Any of those I could listen to all these albums on just on repeat on my way home from gigs or anything.
I think we might have mentioned it last episode, but for our listeners, the Rick Beato interview with Keith Jarrett over the last few weeks is some of the best time you'll ever spend, because obviously Keith is not that well a man now, but even what he showed he could do in that interview, in spite of his infirmity, is just amazing.
Yeah, it's a really sad interview for me to see him like that. I knew that he had a stroke. I didn't know it was that bad. But that was a great interview. Yeah, I watched that one.
No, great picks. They're brilliant picks, Carey. Thank you very much. And then our final quick-fire 10 questions. So short, sharp answers to 10 ones. First keyboard you ever owned?
Yeah, it was, I want to say Roland FP something. It was silver, 88 key, hammer weighted. Yeah, I loved that keyboard. It was cool. I don't know where it is right
decent,
now.
No, decent first one, yeah. Most important pre-gig ritual for you?
Showing up early. Yeah, I'm usually always the first person there. I'm usually the first person at the gig and the first one packed up and ready to go. So that's my ritual, just show up early.
You sound like me. Keytars, sexy or an abomination?
Does it have to be one or the other?
No, look, it can be both. A lot of people say it depends on the context.
It depends. Yeah, I mean, at Disney World, there were a lot of like keytars, and if you've ever heard of a Zen drum, which is like what Future Man and that band Bela Fleck, what he uses, I think it's cool for what it is. I wouldn't want to ever see it at like a jazz gig, but I think they're very cool.
No, excellent. And then I think I know the answer to this one, given you mostly play B3 and a piano and stuff, is transpose button or adjust on the fly?
Adjust on the fly. And speaking of that, I remember when I was working at Disney World, this was the first time I ever saw something like this. The main keyboard player really was like a keyboard player, not like a piano player. And he was really good at creating sounds and really getting that part of the keyboard dialed in. And I remember there was one song that it was a very chromatic kind of line. It was like I can't remember if it was like a sitar sound or what, but I remember playing it either in a rehearsal or maybe it was like even on stage. And I remember thinking like, wait, there's like something didn't work. And then I went back to listen to it when no one else was there. and I learned that there were like one or two notes muted. Like if you play like a, if in the key of G, like a G sharp and an A sharp were muted. And he said, yeah, he did that because he kept like messing up and playing the wrong notes. So he would actually like mute the wrong notes in the key. And I remember that blew my mind that you can do that, let alone why would you ever want to do that?
Yeah, so, I've never even thought of that.
Yeah. Anyways,
that's amazing. Yeah. Wow. No, that's good. Good answer. Favorite gig you've ever done?
That's tough. There's been a lot of really fun ones. I think the Michael Bublé Christmas special, that was a highlight because of just being there, and also the Tedeschi Trucks, all those shows. My very first show with them was my birthday, so at the end of that show, so nervous, and then the second you walk on stage, it's, oh my God, everything just calms down, and then Susan led the whole audience in singing "Happy Birthday" to me. So,
oh wow,
yeah. Luckily, there's been some fun memories.
Yeah, that's amazing. Favorite gig you've ever attended as an audience member?
I just saw maybe a year ago. I don't know if you know the band Scary Pockets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to be in a few of their videos. I was able to go see them at a like pretty big sold out show here in LA about a year ago, and half the show was them. The other half of the show featured DH3, Devin Ryan Harris, who's the guitarist with John Mayer, and his own music is incredible. But I think that was just an incredible show. If you know Scary Pockets, they're always featuring different musicians. That show featured Will Lee, John Scofield, Greg Fillinganes was in the audience, and he jumped up on stage. Wow. It was just an incredible show, and pretty memorable.
Great pick. Best thing about playing live?
The interaction with the audience, and how it's always different every time, and you just have to be on your toes, and it's fun.
No, great. And then the worst thing about playing live?
I guess if the sound is bad, that could be the worst part. I don't know. There's a lot of trying to think of what to say without
given that you're first to a gig, it's probably the waiting.
A lot of the waiting. Yeah, it's a lot of hurry up and wait, right? But probably being the organ player, it's probably the load in and load out, especially, in fact, the load out more than the load in, because you just played this great show and you want to hang out and talk to everyone, and like, oh crap, I still got to deal with this thing.
That's right.
Load out.
Yeah. No, great one. And then one thing you'd like to see invented that'd make your life as a keyboard player easier?
I don't want to say, a lighter, smaller B3, because I just think it's perfect the way it is. If it was any smaller, it would look silly. I guess I would like to see a more dependable, maybe a solid state B3 and Leslie that I know, similar to a keyboard, will always turn on and it will always work, but without losing the beautiful parts of the B3, the dirt, the distortion, some of, just like a Rhodes, a Clav, a Whirly, B3, even a real piano, some of the out of tuneness, and this note doesn't work as well as the other note, or it's something's wrong with the pedal or something. Some of that's part of the beauty of those instruments. But I mean, but the fact that sometimes big issues could arise, I hope at some point there's a way to get around that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great suggestion. And then what do you do to keep sane outside of music, Carey? What's a hobby or activity you like to do just to relax?
There's not a lot of time outside of music for me, but I've got a beautiful dog. That's Charlie. That's somewhere over there.
Oh, there you go. I was thinking it was a cat I saw before stretching. That's your lovely dog. There you go.
I also have 3 cats. And so between the dog, the 3 cats, my
beautiful.
wife, Yeah.
You got
We
plenty.
we've got plenty. We have a house out in Joshua Tree, which is about almost like two
Oh,
and a half
wow.
hours from LA, and we it's primarily an Airbnb, but it's fun to take time off and spend time out there for a day or two. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's really
I know a number of musicians that love going to Joshua Tree just for a weekend or 3 or 4 days. It's just such a great place to relax for a while.
it's beautiful, and there's a lot of great musicians that live out there. And yeah, if you need a place to stay, let me know. I've got a
Yeah,
pretty comfortable,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah, comfortable Airbnb.
Noted. Carey, can't thank you enough, and sorry we don't have more time to chat. That was absolutely brilliant. I think, yeah, as I said, at least 30 or 40 more years of a career to go. I think it'll be amazing just to see what you continue to go on and do, and can't thank you enough for spending the time.
Thank you.
So there we have it. A huge thanks to Carey for his time. He was an absolute pleasure to talk to. And as I said to Carey after we stopped recording, I'm really hoping he gets down under at some stage. Would love to meet him in the flesh and talk more about his amazing career, which I can only imagine is going to continue going from strength to strength. So yeah, thank you again, Carey. That was excellent. So we'll be back again in a couple of weeks, but I do want to give a quick shout out to our gold and silver supporters. Brother Paul Brown from the Waterboys. I know I say it a lot of episodes, but do follow Brother Paul on either YouTube or Facebook in particular, and I think Instagram as well. He's touring at the moment, and some of the videos of what he does, if you've watched our interview, he's a high energy guy, and that translates every single night on stage. I just love watching his videos. So thank you for your support, Brother Paul. Tammy Catcher of Tammy's Musical Stew, we also hugely appreciate your support, Tammy. You're an absolute stalwart of what we do. And we do hugely appreciate it. The musicplayer.com forums, again, I'm very proud to have been a member of those forums since 2001, which just shows that I'm A, old, and B, the quality of those forums. So thank you, musicplayer.com forums. Radio Grande, the great funk reimaginings of key songs. Love them to bits. Their last one has been getting quite a bit of attention, which is In Excess's Never Tear Us Apart. Do check it out. Love the singer Tyler Heaney. Sings that one beautiful. And then finally, Midnight Mastering. Mike and Midnight Mastering team do brilliant jobs of mixing and mastering tracks. I personally would recommend them to anyone that creates their own music and wants a great job. Those automatic services like Lander, they do a job to some extent, but you need a human touch, and I can't guarantee or recommend. I can't recommend. I can definitely guarantee Mike. I can't recommend him highly enough. So thank you, Mike at Midnight Mastering. Thank you all for your support. We'll definitely be back, as I said, in a couple of weeks. And until then, have a great time.